Staying in the High Court in Tshwane, judges there ruling that government can no longer export weapons made here to Myanmar after that country went through a coup 3 years ago. Currently, the government of Myanmar is controlled by the military, but the country is really gripped by a civil war. This ruling now appears to mean that our government cannot sell weapons to any country that then undergoes an undemocratic change of government. Dr. Atilla Kisla is the International Justice Cluster Lead for the Southern African Litigation Centre. Dr. Kisla, good afternoon to you. Technically, as I understand it, this case actually brought against an institution in our government called the National Conventional Arms Control Committee. What did the court actually say? What order did they make?
Thanks so much for having me, Stephen. So the order that the court made specifically refers to the application that the Southern Africa Litigation Centre brought in October 2022, which was based on the developments in Myanmar between the time from 2017 to 2021 and the corresponding arms exports from South Africa to Myanmar in the same time. And we argued in our application that during that time period, there were UN fact-finding missions or UN special rapporteurs concluding there were reasonable grounds to believe that a genocide has been committed against the Rohingya people in Rakhine State in Myanmar, as well as an ICC investigation was authorized, as well as an International Court of Justice issued provisional measures in relation to potential breaches of the Genocide Convention, in the same way as it did in the Palestine matter. And on top of that, in February 2021, we had a military coup who took over the power in the country, and the human rights situation just deteriorated from there. And during this entire time, even after the coup, we argued in our papers that the South African authorities have exported or authorized exports, arms exports, to Myanmar. And the order that the court issued refers specifically to the export permits that were granted in 2021, but also it goes further and declares that the National Conventional Arms Control Committee, the committee that is in charge of authorizing these permits, has an obligation to suspend any contract or export permit that facilitates arms to a country that has, like you said, experienced an unconstitutional change of government, but also where a country has been reasonably suspected by a UN-mandated person like a UN Special Rapporteur or independent expert or fact-finding mission that that country has committed, reasonably suspected of committed any international crimes like war crimes or genocide. So the order goes even beyond the situation in Myanmar and is very relevant for any kind of situation where we are exporting arms to a country that went, for instance, through a military coup.
Does it say anything about democracy? So what I'm trying to get to is there's some countries that I understand we've sold arms to that are not democracies. Saudi Arabia is not a democracy. Saudi Arabia does not respect human rights. I think their government would probably say that actually publicly with no shame. And yet we've been selling weapons to them. I'm not sure, but some of those weapons might have ended up being part of the Saudi Arabian bombing campaign in Yemen. It's a very complicated part of the world at the moment, and there are many different elements to it. But could a ruling like this lay a precedent to say that actually our government should not or could not or must not be selling weapons to a country that is not democratic and does not respect human rights like Saudi Arabia?
Actually, it can suspend those kind of permits. As we know from various UN Special Rapporteur reports and UN fact-finding independent expert reports, especially until the end of 2021, those reports have, for instance, concluded that Saudi Arabia has been suspected of committing international crimes. So in a scenario like that, what the order actually clarifies is that the committee that is in charge of authorizing these permits has an obligation to suspend these permits, and during the suspension of those permits, no further arms exports can leave the country.
The National Conventional Arms Control Committee, I mean, I know it exists, but we don't hear much about it. And I don't think that's an accident. I don't think it wants us to hear much about it. Is there a duty on that institution and the way the whole system works to be a bit more transparent so that we actually know who we're selling weapons to. Not that Denel is selling many weapons at the moment, but that we should know legally where weapons are going.
Actually, it's also set out in the National Convention on Arms Control Act that the NCACC must report to Parliament, and it does so. Unfortunately, this doesn't get very often picked up, but periodically, every quarter, the NCACC is reporting to the Joint Standing Committee of Defense and is presenting its report on the quarterly reports. And those reports also include to which countries South Africa has exported arms to. So in that regard, it fulfills its obligation to be transparent about South Africa's arms exports.
Dr. Atilla Kisla, thanks very much indeed. Really do appreciate the time today. And of course, the International Justice Cluster Lead at the Southern African Litigation Centre.